You know, we all see taxes. They show up on our paychecks at the grocery store. It feels like the price we just have to pay. But what if I told you the real cost of a tax isn't just the money that leaves your wallet? What if there's a hidden cost, an invisible loss that literally destroys economic value? Well, in this explainer, that's exactly what we're going to uncover. We're going to find that hidden cost and see how it shapes everything from your personal budget to huge national policy debates. And let's start with this famous quote from Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. It really sets the stage perfectly, doesn't it? Taxes aren't some evil thing. They're the foundation of a society that actually works. They pay for our roads, our schools, our safety. They're basically our membership fees for being part of a civilization.
But that quote also begs a really important economic question. If taxes are the price, what's the full cost? See, it's not just about money moving from your pocket to the government's. The real story, the one we're digging into, is that taxes change how we act. They change our incentives, and that change creates a ripple effect with a cost all its own. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at an ideal market to get our starting point. Then we'll throw a tax into the mix and see just how disruptive it is. After that, we'll get into elasticity. This is the real key to understanding why all this matters. Then we'll check out the famous Laffer curve and the weird relationship between how big a tax is and how much money it brings in. And finally, we'll tie it all together with the real-world debate over labor taxes. Let's get into it.
Okay, first things first. Before we can see the damage a tax does, we need a before picture. We need to establish a baseline. In economics, that perfect before picture is an ideal free market, where buyers and sellers can do their thing without any interference. So the fundamental idea of a free market looks something like this graph. You've got the demand curve sloping down. The higher the price, the less people want to buy. And you've got the supply curve sloping up. The higher the price, the more producers want to sell. That sweet spot right where they cross, that's what we call equilibrium. And at that specific point, the total economic benefit for everybody, what economists call total surplus, is as big as it can possibly be.
But how do we actually measure that benefit? Well, we split it into two pieces. First, you have consumer surplus. This is the deal the buyers are getting. Let's say you were totally willing to pay $50 for a concert ticket, but you snagged it for $30. That extra $20, that's your consumer surplus. Then there's producer surplus, the same idea but for sellers. If it cost them $10 to make that ticket and they sold it for $30, they got $20 of producer surplus. Total surplus is just what you get when you add those two together. It's the total win from the trade.
Now let's connect that to our graph. Have a look at this table. In a world without taxes, the consumer surplus is the whole area under the demand curve, but above the price. On this graph, that's areas A, B, and C all combined. Producer surplus is the area above the supply curve but below the price, so that's D, E, and F. The government isn't taking a cut, so its revenue is zero. That means the total pie for society is the sum of all those pieces. That's our benchmark for a perfectly humming, efficient market. And now for part two, the tax disruption. This is where things get interesting. We're about to drop a tax right into our perfect little market and see exactly what happens when the government decides it's time to take a piece of the action.
Okay, here is the absolute most important thing to understand about a tax. It drives a wedge right between the price the buyer pays and the price the seller actually gets to keep. All of a sudden, there isn't just one market price anymore. Nope. Buyers end up paying a higher price and sellers end up receiving a lower price. And that gap, that space between those two prices, that is the tax. And the direct result of this is that fewer people are buying and fewer people are selling. The market actually shrinks.
This table right here does the full accounting for us, so let's walk through it line by line. First, the consumers. Their surplus got way smaller, didn't it? It's now just area A. They've lost out on B and C. Now, the producers. Same story. Their surplus is now only area F. They've lost D and E. So where did some of that lost surplus go? Well, the government now has revenue. The size of the tax times the new, lower quantity sold, that's area B plus area D. But wait a minute. Take a look at that last column. What happened to C and E? The government didn't get them. They weren't transferred to anyone. They just disappeared. This is the hidden cost.
And that vanished surplus has a name. It's the core concept for this whole explainer: deadweight loss. This isn't just money changing hands. This is a pure, unrecoverable loss of economic value for society. It represents all the win-win deals that would have happened but are now blocked by the tax. It's wealth and prosperity that could have existed, but now it doesn't.
Let's make this super clear with a story about Mike and May. It starts out great. May would happily pay $120 for a clean house.
It costs Mike $80 in time and supplies to do the job. So if they agree on a price of, say, $100, everybody wins. Meg gets $20 of consumer surplus, Mike gets $20 of producer surplus. They've just created $40 of total value. But then, the government slaps a $50 tax on cleaning services. All of a sudden, the math is impossible. The most May will pay is $120. But for Mike to cover his $80 cost and the $50 tax, he'd need to charge $130. So the deal is off. It just doesn't happen. And what's the result? That $40 of value that they could have created is just gone. Boof. That is deadweight loss in its purest form.
Okay, so we've established that taxes create this deadweight loss. The next big question is, what makes that loss big or small? And the answer to that question comes down to one crucial economic concept: elasticity. It's just a fancy word for how much people react when prices change.
So let's look at the two extremes. On one side, you have an inelastic market. This is where people's behavior doesn't really change much even when the price goes up. Think about something like life-saving medicine. You're going to buy it no matter what. So a tax on an inelastic good doesn't stop many trades from happening, and the deadweight loss is pretty small. But on the other side, you have an elastic market. Here, people are super responsive to price changes because they've got tons of other options. Think luxury cars. If you tax them heavily, people will just buy something else. This causes a huge drop in sales and, you guessed it, a very large deadweight loss.
And you can see this plain as day on these graphs. On the left, that steep, almost vertical line is an inelastic supply curve. When we add the tax, the quantity sold barely budges. See that tiny little deadweight loss triangle? It's small. But now look at the graph on the right with that flat, elastic supply curve. The exact same tax causes a massive crater in the quantity sold, and that deadweight loss triangle is now enormous. The lesson here is crystal clear. The more a tax changes people's behavior, the greater its hidden cost to the economy.
This brings us to our fifth and final section, where we're going to take all this theory and apply it to the real world. Because this whole idea of elasticity and deadweight loss is right at the heart of one of the biggest, most enduring political arguments out there. How much should we tax people's income from labor?
The whole argument really boils down to this one question. Just how elastic is the supply of labor? One side says it's pretty inelastic. Their argument is that most primary earners, they have to work a 40-hour week just to pay the bills, no matter what the tax rate is. So the deadweight loss from taxing them is small. But the other side says, whoa, not so fast. They argue labor is actually very elastic if you look at the right groups. Think about second earners in a family deciding if going back to work is even worth it after taxes, or people deciding whether to pick up an overtime shift, or older folks choosing when to retire. If that view is right, then labor taxes are actually causing huge distortions and a massive deadweight loss.
All right, now for our fourth section. We know that deadweight loss depends on elasticity, but it also really depends on the size of the tax itself. And this crazy relationship between the tax rate and the actual revenue you get is shown by the famous, and sometimes controversial, Laffer curve. So check out what happens as a tax gets bigger and bigger. You start with a small tax. You get a little bit of revenue and a little deadweight loss. No big deal. Then you move to a medium tax. Okay, revenue goes up, but the deadweight loss gets bigger too. But look what happens when the tax becomes huge. The deadweight loss is now massive, but the tax revenue has actually gone down. Why? Because the tax is so punishing that it has pretty much killed the market it was trying to tax in the first place.
And for any of you studying for an exam, you need to tattoo this on your brain. The deadweight loss increases with the square of the tax rate. Remember from geometry, the area of a triangle is half base times height? Well, as a tax gets bigger, both the base and the height of that deadweight loss triangle get bigger. The result is that if you double the size of a tax, the deadweight loss doesn't just double, it quadruples. It goes up by a factor of 4. If you triple the tax rate, the loss increases by a factor of 9. The economic damage grows exponentially faster than the tax itself.
And that's exactly what the Laffer curve shows us. On the left side of the curve, as you raise tax rates from zero, government revenue goes up. Makes sense. But at some point, you hit a peak. And if you keep raising taxes past that point, the high rates discourage so much work and investment that the whole economy shrinks. And when the pie gets smaller, the government slice, the tax revenue, actually gets smaller too, even though the rate is high.
So, the multi-trillion-dollar question for any government is, where are we on that curve? Well, this slide is pretty revealing. A panel of top economists was asked a simple question. In the U.S. today, would cutting income tax rates lead to more revenue? The result? 96% said disagree. A full 0% said agree. That is a massive consensus. It suggests that most experts believe the U.S. is firmly on the upward sloping part of the curve, where a tax cut would mean less revenue, not more. And that leaves us with the fundamental puzzle of public finance. We absolutely need taxes to have a functioning, civilized society. We've established that. But we now also know that every tax takes a hidden toll. It creates a deadweight loss by warping the very economic activity it's trying to fund. So the challenge for every government is this. How do you design a tax system that gets the money you need while doing the least amount of economic damage possible? Understanding deadweight loss is the very first step to figuring that out.